I am your host, Michael. In this episode of Torah and Kabbalah, we find a revelation of Rashbi's perspective of Jethro. In our online Parsha segment for Yitro, it says Jethro, the former ruler of Midian. But in the Tanakh, it says Jethro, priest of Midian. There is no difference in identifying him as the father-in-law of Moses, but the discourse in the Zohar says that Jethro became a priest of Midian after converting from being priest of On. Midian is the place where Jethro ruled and lived, but On was the name of a pagan god. Rashbi says that Jethro was a great and supreme priest, appointed over all the pagan world. Verse 20. It was significant that Jethro says, as quoted by Rashbi, Hashem is supreme over all Elohim. Hashem is supreme over all Elohim. The JPS Tanakh quotes, the Lord is greater than all other gods. The meaning of this different version is far deeper than it seems. The word Elohim is typically plural and refers to the angels of God. But you will find it used throughout the Zohar as if it's interchangeable with Hashem, but it's not. Elohim is the plural form, and it refers to two different entities, two different possible meanings. One is that it refers to the angels, the host of angels, any of the angels of Hashem. But it was also used to refer to false gods, because the angels were not gods, but they were the hosts of Hashem. Because Hashem is a singularity as God in all the universe, the hosts are the angels of Hashem. They are the Elohim. But in this case, Elohim refers not to the angels of Hashem, but to other gods. So there is this alternate meaning when using the word of Elohim that you must be very aware of. Hashem is supreme over all the host of spirits. The significance is that the multitude that departed Egypt was a mixture of people. They were not all Israelites, whose God is Hashem. Many of them were Egyptians. For a priest of On to declare Hashem supreme over all gods, something miraculous occurred in his experience. The claim that Jethro became a priest of Midian upon declaring Hashem to be supreme has precedence in the story of Abraham, wherein Melchizedek, the king of Salem, proclaimed Abraham the victor in the battle of the valley of Siddim, and blessed Abraham, saying, Blessed be Abraham of God Most High. He was a priest of God Most High. Melchizedek and Jethro are similar in that they both made a similar declaration about Hashem and were both priests it may be said that Moses was the reincarnation of Abraham, whose return was to achieve tikkun, the redemption for Jethro and the Egyptians who fled with the Israelites. And Moses would remain a difficult passage for all of them, and they would have to convert. So the significance of Jethro is that, and as Rashbi is arguing here, is that Jethro converted. Now, in the beginning of this particular part of the Zohar where we are covering Yitro in the discourse, Rashbi talks about the raising of hands. The most important part of the discourse in the Zohar for Yitro is the explanation of how it is wrong to raise your hands to God if they are not raised with praise and prayer. With the 10 fingers representing the 10 Sephirot, the emanations of the divine light, raising hands is a physical act of ascension in prayer. The discourse proves that these emanations of Sephirot are bidirectional. Give praise to God and receive His blessings. Do not raise your hands in praise idly, is the caution of Rashbi's own view. The Tosefta, beginning in verse 34, is a description of the Partufim. All of what is being described is stated metaphorically. The phrase in that chapter is a metaphor for the Partufim structure. The phrase in that chamber is a metaphor for the Partufim structure. The gates of the chamber are the same as the petals of the rose. So here we are with the Partufim. And as you can see, Tiferet is here at the bottom. So here we have Tiferet. It is above Malchut. This is where Rashbi describes is Moses. But the higher level one, Yesh'uan, is where Rashbi says Joseph is. The gates of the chamber are the same as the petals of the rose. These are the gates of the chamber. All of these different Sephirot, these would be the gates of the chamber, and this would be the chamber itself, as Rashbi is describing it. They are the 6 Sephirot above Malchut that make up this chamber, which is the center of the Partufim. The last part of the Tosefta declares all of it a secret. But there is no secret. The secret was concealed in metaphor, and only those who know the theory of Kabbalah will understand and have the wisdom to know what has been said in the discourse. In verse 176 of the Zohar, chapter, or volume 18, I should say, in chapter 12 of Yitro, Rashbi reveals a secret without revealing it. And you shall behold the secrets. The secret of secrets is in his statement, yet we must further study and ponder the secrets of the book of Adam, as from that point continues the secret book of King Solomon. The book of Adam is Genesis chapter 5. After the book of Adam was the secret book of King Solomon. After chapter 5 is currently chapter 6 in Genesis. But the secret book of Solomon is not in the Tanakh today because it was removed to keep it a secret. That's why it's a secret. The current chapter 6 in Genesis only contains a portion of the secret book of King Solomon. In fact, there is only a very condensed version of the whole book in a few verses, because the majority of what remained from that secret book is the story of Noah. The secret book of King Solomon was the book of Enoch. There is another known secret book of Solomon, but it is not the book that Rashbi and other Jews knew before and after the Second Temple period. It was scribed in the First Temple period by King Solomon, who gave it to... Now, I need to be clear on this. The book of Enoch was most likely scribed in the First Temple period by King Solomon, who gave it to Menelik I, who was his son by Queen of Sheba, and later became king of Ethiopia. He copied it into Ethiopic, and those copies survived until discovered in 1773 by Scottish explorer James Bruce, who took them back to Europe. The Book of Enoch was the story of a rebellion in heaven by the Elohim, the angels of the Lord, who went down to the earth and proclaimed themselves to be gods to men in violation. Oh, you bet. They weren't allowed to do that. They were in violation of God's commandments for them. So Elohim is the angels of the Lord, plural, and it also refers to false gods, those who rebelled against God and became false gods. God is a singularity and is single in the name Eloi. The angels of the Lord are a multitude, and they are Elohim, or the holy hosts. The inaccurate use of Elohim appears throughout the Zohar.com version, along with many other errors in translation. Always refer to the JPS Tanakh or another valid source, such as this online Chumash that I like to use. But I always go back to the Tanakh, because some words get changed for clarity. In this case, it's better to understand that Jethro was the priest and ruler of Midian, and he was not entirely convinced that Moses was following Hashem until Moses came back and told him what had happened. Now Moses gets advice from Jethro, and the importance of this advice is that it's ancient advice. It's ancient information. This is good advice. And the most important characteristic of this passage, Shemot Yitro, is the advice Jethro gives to Moses. It has been established that the Zohar is referring to Jethro as having been one of Pharaoh's advisors is not a factual account of Jethro's life. The story in the Zohar about Jethro being one of the three priests to Pharaoh is actually just a parable, and there is no accuracy in the telling of it as the factual life of Jethro, who was the father-in-law of Moses. Because as we find out, Moses tells Jethro about everything that happened as if Jethro didn't even know. If he had been one of the priests of Pharaoh, he would have been there knowing everything. So there would have been no purpose for Moses to tell him what had happened if he had been one of the priests of Pharaoh. But the purpose of it appearing in the text of the Zohar is to create this parable to explain how Jethro was a convert. Jethro was Yesh'uan. He was Yeshua. the saved, which makes him Yesh'uan. The story in the Zohar is a parable, and there is no accuracy in the telling of it as fact. Its purpose is to illustrate the matter of how Jethro converts. There is also the clarification of Elohim as the plural form, and it is also used to refer to false gods, not the actual angels. Yitro declares, Hashem is greater than all Elohim, all false gods. Afterwards, Jethro observed how Moses administered justice and organized the people. Jethro drew upon the ancient words of the original Torah that were kept as an oral teaching until Moses presented it in writing, before it became Genesis and contained the book of the generations of Adam. The oral teaching of the Torah also told the story of the Elohim who rebelled against Hashem. They became known as the fallen angels, and their story was kept secret. It was written down during the time of Solomon and given the title, the Book of Enoch. The proof of this is in the words of Jethro, who advises Moses to choose capable men and appoint them to be chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. That's Exodus chapter 8, verse 26. This similar description of organization and administration appears in the Book of Enoch in chapter 68, verse 3. These are the chiefs of their angels, and the names of the leaders of their hundreds, and the leaders of their fifties, and the leaders of their tens. Another reference is in chapter 74, verse 1. These are the leaders of the chiefs of the thousands. The oral teaching of the Torah existed before Moses put it in writing, and it came from Shem, who was anointed a priest by Noah before the dispersion. Abraham knew it. Isaac's son Jacob favored Torah school and attended Torah academies, while Esau worked in the fields. The story of the generations of Adam and the angel rebellion and the great flood were kept in the secret book of King Solomon that was kept with the Ark of the Covenant from the time of Solomon when he gave it to Menelik, his son by Queen Sheba. The other secret book of Solomon is a different mystery that does not have any archaeological validation prior to the 15th century. In fact, its inception may only have resulted from the discovery of the Zohar in the 12th century. This other secret book of Solomon is called Key of Solomon the King. Its English translation was published in 1889, only 6 years after the last edition of the BOE, the Book of Enoch, was published in 1883. The Key of the King of Solomon, its English translation was published in 1889, only 6 years after the last edition of the Book of Enoch was published in 1883. This Key of Solomon is claimed to be a grimoire of Kabbalism. The text may actually be the creation of Christian heretics who were using the secrets of the real Book of Solomon combined with additional fictionalized content. The book is a vain attempt to use the name of God as the Tetragrammaton to conjure spirits. It has been attributed to Jews by its content because it uses the terminology of Kabbalah as it appears in the Zohar. Rashbi refers to these two books, the secret books of Solomon, in the discussion of Jethro's advice to Moses because he also knew that the words of Jethro were in this secret book of Solomon. The advice Jethro gave Moses was the wisest of advices, and the concept of delegating authority to others was Hashem's teaching to the Elohim. The angels organized in this manner of having chiefs appointed over various numbers of subordinate leaders who were appointed over successively smaller numbers from a larger number. Moses took Jethro's advice. The Tetragrammaton. Throughout this series, I will be continuing to point out examples of Tetragrammaton codification in the Tanakh and other sacred texts. These codifications of the sacred name of God, the Tetragrammaton, are not a secret, but there is a secret about them that is Malchut. Codifying the Tetragrammaton has been done in sacred texts for thousands of years, and it began with the commandment, one of 613, that the name of God must not be spoken or written in vain. Speaking or writing the name of God are, were, and will always be powerful things to do by the person who does it without vanity. The event is nearly impossible because it is a vanity to speak or write the name of God, the Tetragrammaton, without a purpose that will please Hashem. The truth is not the secret. The secret of these codifications is in the recognition of what each variation represents. If it is in an epithetical or deeply codified by figurative language. Deciphering the codifications of the Tetragrammaton is the secret in the books of Solomon. King Solomon wrote several books: the Proverbs, the Song of Solomon, the Key of Solomon, and the Book of Enoch. The history of all these books is apparent, but there are mysteries about some of them. There is not much mystery about the first two named books, because they are in the Tanakh today. The mysteries begin with the latter two books named. Both books might be considered grimoires, which refers to books of spells, incantations, and conjurings. The Key of Solomon, the king, is the opposite of the Book of Enoch, the prophet. And both books were translated from ancient texts of Ethiopic and other languages from manuscripts into English in the late 18th century to 19th century. The last published edition of the Book of Enoch was in 1883, and the publication of the Key of Solomon was in 1889. The 6-year difference could be symbolic. The symbolism is related to the 6 eras of mankind that have passed since the time of Adam. The number of years for each era of the 6 is truly incalculable, because these eras transitioned without the requirement of a specific time frame, other than those stated by the prophets and in the scriptures. The 7th era of mankind will be the Sabbath, and it will be transitioned with the coming of the Messiah. Some of this messianic prophecy appears throughout the discourses in the Zohar, and I will endeavor to point them out when encountered and relevant to the discussion. There is an example of a messianic prophecy referenced in the discourses on Yitro, but there is no relevance to this lesson for delving into the particular occurrence, other than to point out how it is significantly related to the discussion of the two books. The two books referred to by Rashbi in this segment of the Zohar are those two books of King Solomon. The Key of Solomon is called specifically, quote, the Secret Book of Solomon, in verse 176. Rashbi says these two books are from those books that are sealed and are profoundly deep. The truth of Rashbi's statement is proven in the historical account of these books. They were given to Solomon's sons with the instructions to guard them after their father's death by placing them in two separate locations. The Key of Solomon was given to Jeroboam, whose task was to place the book in an ivory casket that was to be interred in Solomon's tomb. The other book, the book of Enoch, the prophet, was given to Menelik I, the son of Solomon and Sheba. He copied it and placed the original in the Ark of the Covenant. Both of these books have been discovered, read, and translated into other languages as a result of tomb robbers, archaeological exploration, and commercial trade in ancient documents. The secret books of Solomon have not been secret for 200 years in the English language, but the identification of these books is the secret of secrets, the Razin, as alluded to by Rashbi. The book of the generation of Adam is in the Bereshit chapter 5, and it was followed by the secret book of Solomon in chapter 6, until it was edited out for secrecy and condensed into a simpler tale after the time of Moses. The power of the book of Enoch's revelation about the evolution of humanity and the rebellion in heaven became a closely guarded secret after the fall of the temple to King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The Babylonians did not acquire the Key of Solomon, and the tale of the book describes its recovery as occurring during an effort to renew the tomb of Solomon. If this tale is true, then the efforts of Ezra and Nehemiah to rebuild the temple would coincide with efforts to renew the tomb of Solomon. Because the Key of Solomon was not kept in the Ark of the Covenant, it was likely recovered from Solomon's tomb by tomb raiders. They likely merchandised it in Europe after translated into Greek, Latin, and even a medieval Hebrew version is said to have existed. It is in the original language, or its original language and manuscript are lost by the accounting of known details about the book. It may be safe to postulate that the original was in Solomon's ancient Hebrew tongue, and the manuscripts turned to dust when exposed to the environment after the book was removed from Solomon's sepulchre. The ancient parchment most likely fell apart during its translation, which made it unsaleable by the thieves who took it. If it exists, there are probably only fragments of it. The information in the Key of Solomon was not lost, but it should have been lost. The Key of Solomon is the text of dark Kabbalah. It should not be accessed or read by a light Kabbalist. The book of Solomon that followed the book of Adam and Bereshit before it was edited for secrecy during the canonization by the Synod after the Second Temple period is the book of Enoch, the prophet, which is Yesh'uan and Bina. The Key of Solomon is Malchut, because it contains the secret of Solomon's powers to bring forth the Elohim to do his bidding in the physical world. The power can only be wielded by a king of righteousness, and none have done so since Solomon. The revelation of the Elohim appears in the book of Enoch. It is the book of light Kabbalah, compared to its opposite of dark Kabbalah, that is the key of Solomon, because it is Malchut. The key of Solomon is in the world of Messiah. It conjures the physical manifestations of the Elohim. When used by a king of righteousness, the Messiah will have the key of Solomon, but it must be combined with the book of Enoch. The two books come together to be those previously separated by Solomon to protect the powers he possessed by knowing him. Giving one book to each of his two sons and then separating them geographically by sending Menelik one back to Ethiopia before his death was Solomon's secret plan to protect his powers from misuse by any future king of Israel who was not chosen by God to be the king of righteousness. The books were separated and hidden to prevent anyone from claiming their powers as king of Israel without God's approval. These two books have been kept a secret by an error, which is Malchut. The key of Solomon has 2 parts. The book of Enoch has 5 parts. The 2 and 5 that are missing. Keep this in mind. The first part of the key of Solomon presents the details of preparing for the use of Solomon's power. The second part of the key of Solomon covers the details of the conjuring prayers and incantations cited to call forth the Elohim. 5 parts of the book of Enoch are the testimony of Enoch, the parables of Enoch, the cosmology, the visions, and the epistle or teaching of Enoch. The key of Solomon, as translated into English, contains extensive use of Kabbalah terminology. There is also the inclusion of the Torah throughout the conjuring prayers and incantations. The contents of the Pentateuch are strewn throughout the writing of the key of Solomon, along with information that is not found anywhere else. The book of Enoch has a similar characteristic. The details in the Pentateuch also appear in the book of Enoch, along with a lot of other information that does not appear anywhere else. The fact that these 2 books contain information not found in any other sacred text associated with the time frame of Solomon or before proves that these books are the secret books of Solomon. There are specific details appearing in both texts that overlap, meaning they appear in both books. However, much of this overlapping information also appears in the Tanakh. The information that does not appear in the Tanakh does not overlap in the 2 books. The key of Solomon is a dark grimoire, but the book of Enoch is the opposite. It is not a grimoire. It is not a book of dark Kabbalism. The key of Solomon does not present any prophecy. The book of Enoch presents a preponderance of prophecy. The details in the key of Solomon are not supported by any of the text in the Tanakh, but the details of the prophecy appearing in the book of Enoch also appear in the Tanakh. The book of Enoch was included after chapter 5 in Bereshit, just as Rashbi says. For Rashbi to have stated in a sense that it followed as past tense the book of Adam tells us that it was not included at the time of his discourse. The proposed time frame for Rashbi's discourses was around 150 circa era. The time frame for the Synod of Jamnia was around 90 to 100 circa era. The 70 patriarchs who met to canonize the text of the Tanakh had the goals of preserving, validating by council agreement, and ensuring the sacred information was kept sacred. The last part is the secret of secrets. Rashbi reveals it by pointing out that in his time, the secret book of Solomon was no longer with or in the text after chapter 5 in Genesis, because the book of generations of Adam was originally from those books that are sealed. That's what he says. The sealed books are those that are no longer in the Bereshit. Rashbi suddenly says that he raised his hands to Hashem. Why? He has already said that one must not raise hands to Hashem empty or in vain. If Rashbi raised his hands to Hashem, then what was it that he offered? What was his request? One raises hands to Hashem for two reasons: to offer praise or to make a request. Rashbi raised his hands to Hashem with a request for wisdom, because that is exactly what Solomon did. When he received the wisdom he needed to rule over Israel. Rashbi was not Solomon, but he was a Kabbalist the same as Solomon and all others before them. A Kabbalist meditates in prayer at Malchut. Well, that is all the time that I have for this episode. I'm going to continue in part 2, and we'll start with the presentation of the Partufim, since this episode ends with elements of Kabbalah that are in the Partufim. So I will begin the second part of this segment of Shemot Yitro with a discussion of the Partufim. See you then.